Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today let's learn about the famous writer F.R. Leavis. F.R. Leavis, 1895-1978. Full name Frank Raymond Leavis. He was born in Cambridge, England. His father, Harry Leavis, a Jewish businessman and a piano expert, and his mother, M.E.S. Leavis. F.R. Leavis grew up in a middle-class intellectual vibrant household. His early exposure to music and literature shaped his sensitivity to aesthetic and moral judgment. His upbringing in Cambridge also placed him at the heart of English intellectual life from a young age. F.R. Leavis attended Pass School, Cambridge, entered Emmanuel College, Cambridge in 1914 to study history, but his studies were interrupted by World War I, in which he served as a medical orderly. After war, he returned to Emmanuel and switched to English literature. He completed his PhD on the relationship between journalism and the English novel in the 1930s. Leavis married Queenie Dorothy Roth, a fellow scholar and a critic, in 1929. She was a formidable intellectual in her own right and co-authored some works with F.R. Leavis. The couple had no children, but they shared a lifelong intellectual and personal partnership. Leavis was known to be austere, intense, and somewhat combative in personality characteristics, and shaped his relationship with colleagues and students alike. Now let's analyze his major works. Books and essays. New Bearings in English Poetry, 1932. And this work introduced the modernist poets like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and Hopkins as central to serious poetry. The next work, Revolution, Tradition and Development in English Poetry, 1936, reassessed the major English poets from John Donne to W.B. Yeats. The next work, The Great Tradition, 1948, asserted the moral seriousness of novelists like Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and Joseph Conrad. The next work, Education and the University, 1943, criticized the decline of serious cultural and the university's role in preserving it. The next work, The Common Pursuit, 1952, a collection of essays on literature, culture, and criticism. The next work, D.H. Lawrence, Novelist, 1955, defended Lawrence as a novelist with a spiritual depth and a vitality. The next book, English Literature in Our Time and the University, 1969. A critique of literary studies' modern direction. The next work, Nor Shall My Sword, discusses on pluralism, compassion, and a social hope, 1972. Reflections on literature's moral and spiritual role. The next work, Thought, Words, and Creativity, 1976. Philosophical reflections on language and culture. The next work, F.R. Leavis, Essays and Documents, posthumous edited work, a collection of his unpublished papers. Now let's analyze the key themes in Leavis' thought. Moral seriousness. Literature, especially the novel, should deal with a ethical complexity and a human responsibility. Leavis valued works that promoted life-affirming values, emotional sincerity, and a psychological depth. The next theme, the Great Tradition, a canon of English novelists, Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and a Conrad, who display seriousness of purpose and moral integrity. He dismissed the popular or commercial literature and writers like Dickens early in his career as sentimental, though later he revised his views on Charles Dickens. The next theme, anti-modernism and higher education, criticized the technocratic, scientific, and vocational drift of universities, advocated for the humanistic mission of literature and forming ethical, prospective individuals. Close reading emphasized the detailed textual analysis as central to literary criticism, influenced by I.A. Richards, but differed by being more judgmental and hierarchical. The next theme, cultural elitism and anti-populism, rejected mass culture, journalism, and popular media as vulgar and destructive, upheld a serious culture as a fragile achievement to be protected. Now let's have some understanding about his academic career. A lecturer and a fellow at a Downing College, Cambridge, where he became a towering figure in literary criticism. He founded a journal named Scrutiny, 1932 to 1953, with Curie Leavis. Scrutiny became the central organ of serious literary criticism in Britain. He never held a professorship, partly due to his controversial and uncompromising nature. He mentored several major critics and writers, including Raymond Williams and L.C. Knights. Now let's analyze the legacy of the writer Leavis. He is one of the most influential critics of English literature in the 20th century. He helped define the Cambridge School of Criticism based on moral seriousness and literary excellence. Despite a later criticism for his elitism and a narrow canon, his emphasis on standards, discipline, and depth in literary education has endured. He inspired both admiration and backlash in subsequent generations, especially during the rise of post-structuralism, feminism, and post-colonial theory. Now, the honors and awards Leavis received. Leavis was never knighted and refused or was excluded from many institutional accolades. In 1967, he was awarded the CBE, that is, Commander of the Order of British Empire, for his services to literature. He is honored more by legacy than by titles, especially within university English departments and among conservative literary scholars. Political and social engagement. Leavis is not outwardly political in party terms, but deeply ideological. He opposed industrialism, commercialism, and materialism. He is concerned about the collapse of cultural standards and the trivialization of thought in modern media and education. He advocated for a meritocratic, intellectually rigorous society guided by cultural leaders and critics. Now let's have some rare contributions and lesser-known facts about Leavis. He rejected T.S. Eliot's religious traditionalism despite admiring Eliot's poetry, leading to an uneasy critical relationships. His relationship with his colleagues was often tense. His dismissal of C.P. Snow in a notorious 1959 lecture that is, two cultures, caused a major controversy. He revised his harsh judgment of Dickens later in life and acknowledged the depth of works like Bleak House. He viewed journalism as a corrupting influence contributing to the decline of serious discourse. His wife, Curie Leavis, was often a co-writer and helped shape his opinions on novels, especially regarding women's writing. The present-day importance of F.R. Leavis. He is still studied as a foundational figure in English literary criticism. His close reading method influenced literary pedagogy globally. F.R. Leavis is often placed in contrast to postmodern and post-structuralist thought. He is seen as both a guardian and a gatekeeper of high culture. His work remains relevant in discussions on canon formation, pedagogy, and a cultural decline. Now let's analyze the main works written by F.R. Leavis. First one, The Great Tradition, 1948, is Leavis's most influential book. The Great Tradition establishes a literary canon of English novelists Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and Joseph Conrad, based on the moral seriousness and artistic integrity. He criticizes writers like Charles Dickens and Thackeray for lacking psychological and ethical depth. The book sets the tone for Leavis's legacy in advocating close reading and a literary value rooted in ethical and humanistic concerns. The next work, New Bearings in English Poetry, 1932. This work marked a turning point in English literary criticism by introducing and defending modernist poets such as T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and Gerald Manley Hopkins. Leavis argues that these poets renew the poetic tradition by engaging with the complexities of the modern world in a fresh, precise language. It challenges romanticism and a Victorian sentimentality, emphasizing discipline, form, and the moral seriousness of poetry. The next work, Education and the University, 1943. This book explores the role of education in shaping cultural and moral life, especially through the teaching of English literature. Leavis warns against the mechanization and utilitarianism creeping into academia, arguing for a humanistic curriculum grounded in moral reflection. The university, he claims, must foster critical intelligence and a living appreciation of culture. The next work, Revaluation, Tradition and Development in English Poetry, 1936. In a Revaluation, Leavis critiques the English poetic tradition from the 17th century to the 20th century, re-examining canonical poets like Milton, Pope, Wordsworth, and Tennyson. He challenges the inflated reputations of some poets while elevating others like John Donne and Hopkins for the intensity and vitality. The work emphasizes that great poetry is rooted in the living language and must be morally and emotionally grounded. The next work, D.H. Lawrence, Novelist, 1955. In this full-length defense of D.H. Lawrence, Leavis positions him as a central figure in an English novelistic tradition. He praises Lawrence's ability to probe the life of feeling, sexual relations, and the modern crisis of human consciousness. Leavis views Lawrence as a great creative writer whose vision of life is both profound and ethically vital. The next work, The Common Pursuit, 1952. A collection of essays that reflect a Leavis approach to literary criticism, focusing on class textual analysis, moral judgment, and a cultural value. The title, borrowed from T.S. Eliot, suggests a shared critical effort to understand and preserve literary standards. There's a range across poets, novelists, and the nature of criticism itself, making it a manifesto of Leavisite values. The next work, Nor Shall My Sword, discusses on pluralism, compassion, and a social hope, 1950. In this politically and culturally oriented work, Leavis critiques the spiritual and cultural fragmentation of modern society. He argues for a recentering of values through literature and humanism, opposing both a leftist ideology and a technocratic rationalism. The work asserts that literature has the power to cultivate social ethics and a communal responsibility. The next work, Two Cultures, The Significance of C.P. North's 1962. Our director responds to C.P. North's famous lecture on the divide between the sciences and the humanities. Leavis critiques North's views of cultural and educational progress. Leavis defends the centrality of literature and moral understanding against what he sees as North's shallow technocratic optimism. The book is both a critique of modern intellectual life and a defense of literary humanism. The next work, Anna Karenina and Other Essays, 1967. This volume includes Leavis's essays on Leo Tolstoy's work Anna Karenina and other pieces on major novelists like James and Conrad. Leavis analyzes these texts for a psychological and moral depth, reaffirming the novel's power to explore ethical human experience. The essays demonstrate his method of close reading and a cultural evaluation. The next work, Thought, Words and Creativity, Art and Thought in Lawrence, published 1976, and a co-written with Dennis Thompson. A late collaborative work with his wife and intellectual partner, Dennis Thompson, this book continues as exploration of Lawrence's thought and style. It emphasizes the creative interplay between language, consciousness, and moral insight in literature. The book also reiterates Leavis' belief in literature as a unique way of understanding life and ethical complexity.